All right. Welcome, everyone. Up next, we have Wasabi. He's going to go over some ATM hacking stuff. So Wasabi is not a food. He is a person. He is some Swift alum. He's also heavily involved with CCDC and CBTC. Really cool guy. So I'll let you take it from here, Wasabi.
Alrighty, sounds good. Hello, everyone. So sorry in advance. Apparently, my dock has died right before presentation, so I am having to juggle um, everything on one monitor. It's very painful. But that said, let's get started. This talk is fairly in depth. This is a hands-on protocol analysis and hacking talk with real ATMs. If you participated in CPTC over the last few years, you will be able to see the work that went into that. This talk is not the first time this has been given, but I thought being a little smaller, we can go into some more in-depth things, hopefully, if people are interested or curious. So with that, let's begin. Maybe. There we go. So I am Wasabi, sometimes spicy, generally not. I am, as was mentioned, a perpetual volunteer. I have volunteered at pretty much every competition that happens in Southern California, or just California in general. Uh, and then sometimes even not then, just everywhere. But that includes CPTC, so I help organize and build apps. This year, if you worked with the industrial control systems, that was my system that I designed. Previous year, it was the bank website and the ATMs. And in CCDC, basically all the scenarios from Willy Wonka to anything else has been stuff I've helped put together or organized. So I have fun volunteering. So if you see some of these things, this is the behind the scenes look at a lot of the fun that goes on. So with that, let's take a look and go over a couple of things. First, we're going from ATM to the cash box. And for those of you who don't know, ATMs cannot spit money out like they do there. First, the money is actually the wrong orientation. There's actually conveyor belts that can prevent that. But that's besides the point. But what we're going to be doing here is looking at the protocol that allows the ATM to dispense money. So what we're going to do and what we're not going to do. This talk is not for modifying ATMs. Jackpotting ATMs is going to be one of the end results, but we're not tampering with the ATMs. We're not installing software, modifying the firmware, or doing anything to them other than setting them to work. Sorry. And what we're going to do here is this is all a closed environment. The money is ours. We're not hacking real ATMs or anything like that. But this does show the risks involved in all these ATMs that have this same protocol. So specifically, the protocol in here has not been updated in a very long time. It's an old protocol. It's from the 90s with minor revisions. So if that gives you an idea, it's plain text. It supports up to triple DES. So it's a pretty good protocol. Not really, but what we're going to do is persuade that protocol to do the things that we want. And doing that is not the easiest thing because, again, it's an old protocol. We don't have all the pieces of information that we need, how it works, what fields do what, and we have to figure that out. So a bit of background, 2019, which seems like an eternity ago, the CBTC competition, the collegiate pen testing competition, made a simulated bank called DynoBank. It was designed to simulate the large infrastructure that many banks actually have. And to that end, it had a lot of interesting components. And one of the thoughts was, hey, can we get an ATM? That's something that every bank has. And it turns out you can buy pretty much anything in bulk on eBay, from voting machines to ATMs. You just go on there and it's available. So what ended up happening was eBay had in Ohio 12 ATMs available, or 13, I forget, but it was a large number. One of them didn't quite make the journey, but we got them all the way to New York on a road trip, and the vehicle only tipped once. But once they were obtained, it was kind of interesting. It was very exciting to see these ATMs in person. It's not something that you get to mess with every day. But they're old and they were in pretty bad condition. I don't know if the audio is coming through. It's supposed to share audio, but I'm not sure that it's actually doing that like it's supposed to. Okay, so we'll move on. Maybe a lot. So, you know, these ATMs were in bad shape, as I had mentioned. They had in one of them, they had some really pretty disgusting stuff. Like one of them had a dead rat. There were cobwebs. It was absolutely disgusting, and some of them were actually sticky on the outside. As it turns out, the people who decommissioned these ATMs were not necessarily that careful. We found old receipts and things, and as it turns out, most of these came from old Waffle Houses. I mean, I guess the Waffle Houses are still there, but the ATMs are not. And to that end, these are dial-up only. They don't use Ethernet. They don't use modems, like cellular modems to connect to the internet. They're just dial-up. And so we have to find a way to make these ATMs talk. And they love dialing. You could hear them ringing out on the last video if you had audio. But they all try to communicate over dial-up. And so that makes it a challenge. And how do we make a bank when we don't even know how to talk to the ATMs? So general background on this ATM. It's a Hyosung Mini Bank 1500. It's fairly common if you go to like gas stations or things like that, you'll see these ATMs. They're pretty much everywhere. They're fairly old. These are discontinued in 2007 and were in production about a decade. So long time that they were in use and existed. To that end, they still are used. They may be not manufactured anymore, but they still are available. And so there's a few key components of an ATM. First is the card reader. These ATMs could be upgraded to EMV, which is the chip and pin, but we didn't have that upgrade. There's a monochrome LCD, and it's not exactly the most high-res system, but it also internally uses only an 8-bit processor, and it's not exactly the most easy to use system. It has a cassette, which is not like a cassette player, but instead holds the money. We never fully loaded these up. It can hold a lot of cash, and the ATM can be configured to dispense ones, 20s, hundreds. I don't know what else. It's configurable on that. I think 50s as well. But it's configurable, and the bottom part is all steel. It's actually the vault. You have to put in a PIN code and things like that. It's supposed to make it secure, but as we'll see, it's not necessarily the most secure. Main board, ancient Intel processor, 16-bit. I messed up saying 8-bit, but pin pad contains the crypto keys, as it turns out. So if you disconnect the pin pad, it fries the crypto keys and you can't use it. The money dispenser, as it turns out, is a common design. So there's quite a few different money dispensers that are available. There's the print controller, same thing. It's a common design that's still used to this day. So if you need to service it, you can still get the parts. It communicates over a similar protocol. So here's taking a look at one of the main boards. There were a few varieties. On the top of the picture is the actual phone line, the modem. On the bottom is the processor. Underneath is a real-time clock, the printer controller, or serial interface, and then a few other memory chips and things like that. This is just one of the main boards. Here's another one. And this one was kind of interesting because there's a board that was soldered on the top with its own microcontroller. We don't know what this was for, but it was just soldered on top. It presumably is for an expansion or a repair where they just bypassed older chips, but it's not clear what this does. especially considering it's only an Atmel, essentially Arduino type processor, so not a lot of horsepower here. And it doesn't look like it was attached maliciously because it's fairly soldered in on either side, and there's mappings for it on the main board. But it was kind of interesting to see. We didn't try dumping the firmware on this because we didn't expect to be able to reverse it just because of how custom and old it was. So we had to find a different way. In general, these ATMs use and communicate via a local payment processor rather than going all the way through dial-up. First, it's more secure to connect to the internet rather than going through a phone line. And two, it allows you to change your payment processor quite easily because you don't have to contract out to a phone bank that accepts the ATMs. We didn't have an ATM processor. We knew they existed, but we'd never even seen one. So our only option was to try to emulate the payment processor. Of course, the way things generally go, the week of competition, one of the other volunteers had found on eBay a localized payment processor. And here's what it looks like. It's a little rough on the contrast, but the main memory is below the big main processor, which is an ARM processor, ARM v7, so fairly old. The memory, and then the Ethernet. Ethernet's over here, and then here's the phone line, and this is it. It doesn't do much. It just translates the protocol here to Ethernet. And this processor supports up to SSL v3, so we're still not talking something that's extremely good on security. The plan for the competition was a little interesting. It didn't go according to plan, of course, but the original plan was to get a phone bank and connect each ATM to a Raspberry Pi, which connected to our central control system for each team. However, because of limited resources, getting a phone bank is harder these days. The dev system and the system I was working on to build this connected to a jump box, which connected to a Raspberry Pi, which connected multiple modems to a phone bank, and then the ATMs were connected to that phone bank. And this is roughly what we did for the final competition. But how did we get there? Well, dial-up is a bit of a lost art. When was the last time someone has dialed out? I don't think there's too many people who do that too frequently. It looks like there's a fair number of chats, so I'm going to pause in a second. Of course, I can't go back either. But the interesting thing is that we were able to fairly easily obtain modems, but we weren't able to obtain the phone systems, the PBXs, which are for offices to allow multiple lines. You can see it underneath the two modems. The user manual for the ATM we were able to obtain, and it said you can contact a payment processor, but it doesn't say what the processor does or how to communicate to it. That was a little bit of a black box. Of course, in the end, things changed around. And so for every 4 ATMs out of the teams, we had 3 in total PBXs. Each of them connected to 2 Raspberry Pis, which allowed it to do 2 connections at once. Each of the 2 Raspberry Pis then connected to an internet ATM relay gateway, which connected to the actual payment processor. And all of this was custom on the side that says Google Cloud Platform. This was custom code that interfaced. Hello. Okay, I think I'm back. The phone bank connected to the this custom code, which used a custom protocol and eventually a custom database, which interfaced with the website for CPTC and or the competitors' banks in CPTC. And all of this allowed us to actually run a functional bank where users existed and cards existed. So before we begin, I want to just take a quick look at the chat. I don't hear anything. Please tell me.
Oh, that was for earlier. You're completely fine.
Okay, sorry, I'm just
No, you're completely fine. That was from earlier during the video, but we had no issues on our end.
Okay. Yeah, again, it's one screen, so I'm just gonna pause every so often. The way technology always seems to malfunction. Anyway, so we'll get back. So processing data. Well, we kind of reinvented timeshares. So to do this, we only had a limited number of ATMs that we could connect at any given time. And there were two of us. There was me and Forrest working on this at any given time, which meant that two ATMs had to be functional. But because we did not know the protocol, the ATMs would terminate and go into an out of service mode because they could not communicate to the payment processor. Because of this, we could not force them to reconnect after a certain number of retries, which meant that when one of us was working on it, someone have to go out there, Forrest, and reset the ATMs. So when he wanted to do development or testing, I would be watching the serial to make sure that things were working and we were comparing each other's notes. A lot of this involved rediscovering the add commands. You can see the initialization string on the modem. This is what the ATM sends to its modem, and we had to send similar commands. And the challenge is, how do at commands even work? Well, there's not a lot of documentation anymore. There's GSM and CDMA, LTE at commands for those modems, which have a lot more capability than standard dial-up modems. Original protocol for the at commands did not include web requests and things like that that modern at commands do support. So it was a challenge. Thankfully, US robotics still exists and has the highest security standards of any website I've been to recently. If you notice, that says error obsolete, SSL version obsolete. So it wouldn't even load, but we found an older computer to download the information on, and we were able to find the relevant at commands. So in the bottom, translating all these different manual instructions into something that worked, you just do +++ ATSO equals 2, and then new lines. Super simple. But in English, this is actually the automatic answer on line 0, and we're sending it into command mode so that everything is interpreted by the processor rather than the ATM trying to process commands first. It was a lot of fun dealing with the modems, because sometimes when you were dealing with processing, you would see things that made it a little challenging. You know, you're looking for patterns when you're doing protocol analysis. And when you take a look at protocols, it's not exactly clear necessarily what is what. And so when you're looking in here, you group things together like, okay, well, I see this 1C, I see 32, 32, 30. Okay, there's something there. And we tried sending stuff, you know, arbitrarily to see if it would respond, single characters, multiple characters. And in general, it was a big challenge to identify what was going on. So we went through a few revisions. First, it was PySerial, but we realized that PySerial wasn't actually designed to deal with this. So we tried Screen. Screen obviously is not for programming, but we thought maybe we can get stuff to communicate over it with that. That didn't work, so we went to Minicom, and that still didn't quite work. Then we realized and found this old program called Intercept TTY, which allows you to make a fake serial port that relays to a real serial port. So we connected Minicom to the fake one, and we were able to start seeing commands that were being sent, and that allowed us to proceed and make improvements. In between this, of course, there was a lot of broken components, like, you know, throwing in PHP here and there to try to do this in a more standardized, broken way. But the final result was a Python program that was still not working. We were trying to find a handshake, and it was very difficult because we were looking for something that, you know, changed, and we were seeing repeat messages, and it just didn't make sense. As a general information for this, when you're looking for protocols, you start colorizing, you group things together so you can start seeing things that might be related and see what changes. In this case, there's the Fs and 7s that were easy to identify and messages in between. Using this, we were trying to identify things that we could set in the ATM, such as the terminal ID and things, and see if it sent those to us. Of course, that wasn't working. And if you're familiar with ASCII, you may have noticed something, but I won't spoil it. When you decode it, all of a sudden you see the ASCII's actually ring, 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 connect no carrier, ring, ring, ring. This is the modem telling us what it's receiving, not actually the ATM, except for the FFF96E0, but we weren't sure what that was because it's unprintable. So when you're doing protocol analysis again, you're trying to look for a repeat pattern. So for example, if we're looking for raw noise, it's going to be mostly random. There's not going to be a lot of similarities in repeating things. If we're looking for, hex 77, you can see how there's a repeat pattern on what's going on. Or if there's hex FF, you can see how there's something that you can see, happening over and over again. Well, we tried, but we were really hoping to find some information. We tried to find on the vendor's website protocol guides. Of course, those aren't available, but we did find some other information. We originally found the product sales brochure, which says it supports up to Windows CE and triple DES encryption, which is Visa certified, so definitely secure. But we also learned that there was a provisional communications guide that we were able to obtain. We thought, okay, great, this is going to be easy from now on. Unfortunately, it wasn't so simple. The guide is for one specific version, the standard 3, but you can see the ATM support 6 standards that we can choose from. And so we had to find out what was going on with this. And it says, okay, well, set your modem to 300, 1200, or 2400 baud, 7 bits, 1 stop bits, even parity, and the first character is STX. Well, it didn't mean much to us either originally because we, take for granted that ASCII is, well, standardized now. I think I might have removed that character, or it might be coming up, but it was a challenge. We weren't seeing what we were supposed to on these characters. We were seeing random things that didn't make sense, and it was just very frustrating. According to the protocol that we were able to determine, the terminal is supposed to call us. We're supposed to do it. It's supposed to do an inquiry. We're supposed to do a request response. And then it acknowledges it. End of table. Disconnect. Well, the problem is we weren't seeing that. So we were trying to send ENQ, or just one ENQ, but then it didn't do anything. We just kept getting the same message over and over again when we reset it. Well, as it turns out, this protocol has a little mention that it's based on VisaNet. And we found an old FRAC guide from 1994 that says if you want to fuzz VisaNet terminals, just send ENQ to random phone numbers. Well, it talked. It worked. We started getting new messages. Of course, it still didn't make sense, but we were able to proceed with the assumption that things would be a little better. So first things first, we were looking for an ENQ, which is actually an ASCII character. The terminal calls us ENQ, request, response. We weren't seeing that. So we started trying to figure out the parity bits. Is it 7 plus 1 or 8 plus 1? How does this work? What is a parity bit? And why would ENQs send a valid response, but we weren't getting back the correct response from ourselves? Well, the key is in the ASCII. ASCII is standard now, but when this protocol was made, a lot of systems only used 7 bits. If you've taken a look at ASCII, you'll realize that very quickly that the first 7 bits are used for the actual characters, and there's 1 bit that's always fixed. However, in older protocols, that 8th bit on here, it's 7, is called a parity bit, which can be even or odd to check for a parity and ensure that data is coming across correctly. So we were able to start identifying things. We got the start of transmission, the terminal ID, field separators. This is all stuff on the right side that I was able to start identifying from the protocol once we started getting the ASCII corrected and decoded correctly. It's 15 characters in protocol, but the ATM only allows you to set 8. So this was clearly an implementation that they planned to have increased later, but never did. And then at the very end, there's an LRC, which was supposed to be a verification of the entire message. We had issues, more specifically, I had issues. LRC is implementation dependent. You'd think it would be consistent, but there's slightly different ways that you can do the calculation. And in the end, the calculation for verifying an entire message just needs to match the check on the other side of the communication system. Well, it turns out that the standard is pretty simple, and we were able to actually start calculating the LRCs, which is longitudinal redundancy check. I believe, I forget the exact terminology, but we were able to get it. And then the ATM was like, hey, I need a message. So it turns out it needs, when it first connects, it needs a host tables download, which gives the ATM a whole bunch of information, including the encryption key and a bunch of other information that it needs to be able to activate. So here's a picture from our code. You can see where I wrote in some message handlers where it says, hey, I'm seeing message. And at the bottom is the terminal, the protocol actually that we sent in characters that you can actually understand. So once we got it communicating, there was still one problem. It was sending 15. If you do the parity bit, you'll see that 05, which is a knack. So what happened? Well, we got the totals and all that stuff, but there's a lot of timing issues when you're going through. This ATM is designed for like a mainframe, a state machine, where it does things in a very specific sequence and rapidly. So state machines are important in programming, and if you're not using them and you're, there's a lot of ways to make a state machine, but essentially a state machine allows us to do triggers and checks for things that we need to, and take a complex code and turn it into something that is a little more sane. The flowchart on the right is the state machine for the ATM handler. It starts with reading in bytes. If it gets a null byte, it tries to see it, or if it gets a byte, it tries to see if it's null or parity bit. If it is not containing an invalid character, it goes past the sequence, starts a timer, which tells us how long we have till the ATM is timed out, and tries to check all the way down to see if the ATM can handle the message and we can handle the message. And each processor takes in the message, the terminal ID, and returns out an output of success or failure, and the message body that it needs to send back. Very simple. It allows us to take this gigantic blob of code and turn it into something a lot simpler, where we're simply just calling a handler and letting the handler move on, assuming all conditions are met. So when we take a look at this, you can see where we see got strained message and it ignores it. And then you can see it actually decodes the message. In here is actually a credit card. Error. Nope. Is that? Nope. I'm trying to do it. There we go. This is the credit card. And that's actually the track data. And so we can see here, we're able to decode the PIN block, which is our encryption message. And then here's the card number. And this is the sequence, which is always incrementing by 1. And here's our terminal ID. And so all this information is put into the processor, where you can see it says calling handler, and then sends it back. And then we get a positive message, which allows us to continue. So I need to get out of pen mode now. Maybe I can do that. Automatic. Okay, so here's the first run where we had actual success. So if you can hear it, it's doing all the dial-up noises. It's thinking. The delay is actually on the side of the ATM and the modem, or the PBX, but then you can see it actually spits money out. And there you go. What we found out was that the money was, it's very specific. It's the calibration for the cash box is highly calibrated to real money. All this is funny money. We didn't actually have hundreds just sitting around in a warehouse room. You can see there's a beard and mustache, and he's looking at us suspiciously. It's all fake money, and it would tear it up because it wasn't the right weight and measurement. So in total, it turns out there were 20 different transaction responses. We use approximately 8 of them. The main ones, though, are success, which is 000, failure, 111, or 19, which is error. There's some like insufficient funds and rejection, which were implemented to make this as real as possible because we want to simulate a real bank that someone could actually red team. But the way it prints out money is a little interesting. It doesn't have floating point because it's a very simple system. What it does have is a padded calculation. So everything is zeros, and you shift it over, you get 20, 200, $2,000. But you know, it's challenging, and I shouldn't be a payment processor. You can see here, I messed up the padding. So dismissed amount was $20. Requested amount was $20, so that's good. However, terminal fee was messed up to $20 as well. So you actually owe $40, and our bank account, which had padding and no checking or validation, I should say, ended up with negative $10 in balance. So never complain about ATM fees again. But here's our final run. I think I'm right on time for about 5-10 minutes of questions, which was my hope for this. But here's an actual run. This is one of the competitors from CPTC, National CPTC, and she had already entered the information. And you can see the screen move, and then the ATM gets the signal and dumps the money out. All this here is the actual protocol and stuff, and the ATM is still a stock ATM. So you could run this and plug it into any other mini bank 1500, and it would still work, which is very exciting. Why is it stuck there? Okay, so but we've shown you how this is works, but the main part is the problem part is that these ATMs are still in use, and they're 15 to 20 years old. The protocol is much older than that, and the encryption it was adequate in the time, but at this point, triple DES is just not even acceptable. Yet we still use it for our payment systems. They do offer upgrades, but it's over $1,000 to upgrade the payment system to EMV, which is chip and pin, and it supports then Ethernet possibly, and a few other things like that. And you may think, oh well, we just don't need to use these protocols anymore. But the problem is these protocols are the basis for our financial system and can't easily be just replaced. We have to start building protocols that can be upgraded in place and not need a full new system, a new ATM essentially, to be able to use them. So things that are better, WebSockets, HP, HPS, continually supporting embedded systems that can be upgraded is better. New ATMs and some of the new systems like that are actually supporting Linux, which is an exciting opportunity because that on its own is fairly hardened out of the box and may allow us to have systems that are a little more secure. So with that, open standards always seem to work. If we take a look at HP, it's an open standard. If we look at some of the other standards like IRC and things like that that are still around that are very old, these things still are getting improved upon, and a client from the 90s can still use it. A classic web browser can still browse the web, even though it doesn't support the modern ciphers. It can still function, and it still gives a valid message that you need to upgrade. And a web browser is a replaceable component. So that's the example, but it's something possible. So now is the question and answer time. The code is on GitHub, and so feel free to follow me and JRWR. And if you have any questions, now is the time to ask them. I only see 2 chat messages. So first one is, what is a parity bit? So parity bits, if the message is odd, it adds a 1 to the front, or can remove a 1, so it'll be a 0. And so when you sum up the characters, so if it's even or odd, that can indicate whether the message was received correctly or incorrectly. It's an old way of verifying each message coming across. So the way this works is there's multiple modems. There's the modem on the Raspberry Pi that controls this, or the embedded system, and then there's the modem in the ATM. The modem in the ATM is embedded, and if for our examples, it might as well be one condensed unit. You can configure it, but let's just say it's the one centralized thing. On our side, though, we connect to a PBX, which is a phone bank system. It allows multiple devices, in this case, multiple ATMs, to communicate to one outbound phone line, which is our Raspberry Pi. And so connecting all that together allows us to multitask. And yeah, I'll pass on the, sorry, someone asked, you should let them know where they can find keys. That was discussed in my Black Hat talk, but yeah, I'm not gonna just share where you can get keys. It's fairly easy though, and very, very easy. But I don't recommend people go out and get ATM keys. But to finish the thought about the phone bank, so PBX joins all the systems together, and then the Raspberry Pi has its own modem that our software communicates to. And essentially what this does is it's like talking over a serial port. So if you've ever connected to like a networking appliance or things like that, that is what we're communicating to. We're talking to the modem, and the modem's relaying that data over the phone line, and the bank, the ATM, is decoding it and communicating back and forth. Hopefully that explains that in a little bit better, but I realize this probably just made everything way more confusing. Where did the idea of working man, I cannot speak anymore. Where did the idea of working with ATMs come from? Well, 1, they're fun, and 2, we had a budget for CPTC, and we were doing a bank. Like the scenario was make a functional bank. And so with a research budget and a opportunity to make a bank, you can get a mainframe, but what's a mainframe going to do? So the next best option was ATMs, and it turns out they're quite cheap. All 12 ATMs only cost less than $500 in total. Now, they were in bad condition, but still 12 ATMs for $500 is hard to beat. They're a little more expensive individually. I think it's like $600 for one. We just got a steal of a deal. We had to drive cross country to do it, but it was worth it. So any other questions on that, or I guess?
We have another question in the chat of, were you able to get the control over the camera at all?
That's a good question. Many banks have point of sale systems that are fairly, not point of sale systems, ATMs that are fairly complex. They have like privacy screens and cameras and that look like mirrors and things like that. These ATMs are stuff that you'll see in gas stations, and the majority of these don't actually have cameras. Our ATMs have no security systems in them other than a tamper sensor to see if someone's like rocking it or something like that. They're very basic ATMs, and you're not going to see these at like an actual bank, but you would see them at like gas stations. And there was a picture I found, someone sent to me online not too long ago, like it was in the front of like a 7-Eleven in a city, just this literal ATM, the mini bank. And so that's the type of place you'll see them. It's just random places that are run by mom and pop shops. They'll have these types of banks, and of course Waffle Houses and other places like that where you're going to need an ATM. Denny's, try not to list every company by name, but restaurants and things like that, where or mom and pop shops are where you'll see these, and they don't really have security. As a little spoiler from my Black Hat talk, people are more determined to hack these physically than they are about security. There's, as someone has implied here, the keys are very easy to obtain. There is a pin pad, but in our ATMs, we're not sure if they were reset or never touched, but they were all like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the vaults. So, but that doesn't even matter, because what people have done, there's videos of these online where people literally just break into a business and they have 2 guys and they just lift these up and they just walk out. I mean, they're heavy, but if you have 2 strong people, nothing's going to stop you. These systems aren't that secure, and then they can break them open at their convenience. So this was more a discovery of or rediscovery of the protocol and protocol analysis, rather than trying to just break into a cool ATM. There's a lot of talks like that. There was a couple years back at DEF CON, there was one. And then there's, of course, Jackpotting, Barnaby Jack, who did this way back in 2010. But those talks are actually doing exploits and things like that. This is just messing with the protocol. So that's the big difference here. Any other questions? You have me captive. I'll check Discord. I have it on my phone. No, it doesn't look like it. So then I guess with 2 minutes to spare, thank you everyone, and have a good rest of your day. Hope you enjoyed the talk, and feel free to follow on Twitter and ask away.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wasabi. We really appreciate the ATM hacking.
Of course, yeah. Once COVID's all over, I can probably roll in my ATM and we can actually do a live demo, but that'll be some time away once the pandemic's better. But anyway, thank you for having me.
Yep.